Hello, everyone, and Merry Christmas. So, tonight I'm going to be reading you a story, and I'm going to split it up over 3 days so none of the segments is too long. But let me pour some, I've got some polar seltzer here. Very, very thirsty. How are you, everyone? See, Black Samurai is here. 'Tis the season to be jolly, merry, happy, and holly. God, it's been so long. It's been a very long time. Hopefully good things are going to happen for everyone from now on. To everyone from now on. We have to pray an awful lot because, things are not doing very well in the world. So I haven't been on for so long. I don't even know what I look like. Do I look okay? Okay, I guess I look okay. My eyes are a little bloodshot. I don't know why. Maybe because it's very cold in here. This is this side. It's very cold in here. I have no heat. And I'll tell you about my backdrop before we start. So right here, I made this because there's 2 little boys next door. They're Italian. And I knighted one of them with the Medal of St. George, which is the oldest order of knighthood. He's the one who fought the dragon. And supposedly the order was founded when they found the pieces of the true cross. And right here is red. This is the order of St. Nicholas. And let me show you what the order looks like. This is really cool. It's like, I'm like really cool. I have a 150-year-old sword that I knighted the kid with for his birthday. And I gave him this rye band and a crown because the Knights Templar, they give you a crown and they make it like you in the degree of royalty that has 7 jewels. So I put 7 jewels on it. But this is the order of St. Nicholas right here. What? Right there. Don't tell Vladimir Putin that I have his order of St. Nicholas. This is the order of St. Nicholas. I'm going to be giving the younger one. He was sick that day. So, and then this is the order of Malta, Templars of Malta. So this is going to be around his neck, and this is going to be on his rye band. And then it's like, I swear to God, I've been such a good mother. It's so fun. So yeah, this is his cape. Cape that I made him. I didn't have the bottom only because they grow so quickly. So that's the inside, which is the sea that surrounds Italy. And southern Italy is red. But this is the order of St. Nicholas. So I thought that would be really fun to add. Anyway, let me get the other thing up, escape the screen. And let me share the screen here so you can see pictures, a little bit of me, but pictures of St. Nicholas. Let me get on there. Right here. I got it here. I'm going to do this on full screen. Come on, full screen. That's full. You gotta be kidding. Gotta be kidding me. Okay. Alrighty. Little me. Okay, so let's start story hour, and I hope you can see me okay. And if you can't, if anything's amiss, please let me know. Okay. I was delighted. So the author is writing this. I was delighted when Howard Brooks suggested releasing a new edition of The True St. Nicholas, first published nearly a decade ago. It prompted me to keep an eye out for the good old saint and fresh evidence of his legacy. Sure enough, the signs are all there. After all these centuries, St. Nicholas is still working wonders. Lights on this side. In 2017, for example, more than 2 million Russians in Moscow and St. Petersburg flocked to glimpse a bone fragment on loan from St. Nicholas's tomb in Bari, Italy. Bari, Italy, if you know that I'm connected with that. I'll tell you the story, maybe the last night of the series. I'll tell you that story. It's a very quick one. The holy relic had not been outside of Italy in more than 900 years. The traveling event was the result of a historic meeting the previous year between Pope Francis and Patriarch Kirill, leader of the Russian Orthodox Church. At first such meeting, since the Great Schism split Christianity in 1054. If you don't know, in southern Italy, that's where the Basilica of St. Nicholas is. That used to be the Byzantine Empire. St. Francis, St. Francis, St. Nicholas, they're on St. Nicholas, not St. Francis today. St. Nicholas is very popular and very beloved in the Byzantine Empire and the Greek Orthodox, because he was from Greece. People in Russia waited up to 24 hours to see the relic. The line stretched for miles. It's important to be close to the grace of St. Nicholas, one young man who drove for hours to stand in line told a Washington Post reporter. All saints are special, but this one is most dear to us. Russia is a country where for generations a murderous communist regime, tell everyone please, murderous and communists go together, and so do very long lines that last for hours, had done its best to stamp out religion. Yet here was the outpouring of faith in God and veneration for a saintly man. It's amazing, despite all those years of communist rule. People are still flocking. They don't forget the Wonderworker. See you good. Thank you, Black Samurai. They don't forget what a wondrous beloved saint he is. And also in China, there's underground movements of other religious beliefs, but it's not very, I've read a lot of things, and it might not be a good idea in that country to, it's very sad. Anyway, I'll say no more. Another sign, every year, North America Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, tracks Santa Claus as he flies around the world on Christmas Eve. What do you know? I remember that. Do you remember that? Hello there, Silas Marner. How you doing? Hey, Felina, how goes it? Tracks Santa Claus as he flies around the world on Christmas Eve. The tradition dates to 1955, when, the story goes, a child misdialed a telephone number in a Sears department store newspaper advertisement that told children they could reach Santa on his private phone. The call came in to an Air Defense Command Center in Colorado Springs, prompting officials to set up a Santa hotline. Since then, every Christmas Eve, military and civilian volunteers have manned telephones answering calls around the world about Santa's flight and whereabouts. Well, I noticed that this little thing is supposed to be it's still on stop. There we go. Let's get back here. It's supposed to move eventually. Okay, today, NORAD. Have you ever heard that when you were a kid? Listen to them tracking Santa Claus around the world. It's kind of exciting, isn't it? Another story I heard about Santa Claus tonight. Apparently, in New York City, two guys had an apartment and they were getting letters to Santa Claus. Apparently they were being routed to their apartment by accident. And then they decided that they would get together a bunch of volunteers and hand a bunch of these letters to each, designate a certain amount to each person. And what they would do is they would go out and get a bunch of presents and they would deliver them to all these children. Isn't that amazing? Anyway, Today, NORAD operates a wonderful website called NORAD Tracks Santa, and that's at www.noradsanta.org, as well as a Facebook page that posts updates on Santa's travels. NORAD confirms Santa has arrived over Istanbul. Can you hear me? Or is there, hope that there isn't an echo. You can tell me if there isn't an echo, because let's see this. Okay, that shouldn't be, because that's on mute. I've been gone for a long time, and I've tried to do other videos, except I've noticed that I've been getting an echo. Something was just wrong, so I just said forget about it. So I just want to make sure everything is coming in A-okay. Okay. Let's see. Santa has arrived over Istanbul, Turkey. The site announced last December 24th. Santa wants to express his thanks for all the children who left out the wonderful Turkish coffee. He said it helps with his long Christmas flight. I hope he has some place to pee, because he's drinking a lot of Turkish coffee, unless it's decaffeinated. I wonder if he stopped for a little visit with his ancestors in Turkey. One Facebook user commented, Santa was a bishop from Turkey, but he actually was from Greece. But he was a bishop in Turkey and died in Myrna. St. Nicholas was a Christian bishop from Myrna, which was Greek and is now in Turkey. Okay, so it used to be Greece, but now it's Turkey. Another user commented quite correctly. So there he is, alive and well in cyberspace. The spirit of generosity that St. Nicholas bequeathed to Santa Claus is at home with our modern technology. Even in a world of satellites and cell phones, the ancient saint touches us. Meanwhile, in New York City, a new church bearing the saint's name has become a symbol of resilience. The original St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church had been a house of worship in Lower Manhattan since 1916. That came to a violent end during the September 11th, 2001 attacks. Remember that? So St. Nicholas's church was destroyed. The church was about 100 years old. Isn't that horrible? The collapse of the South Tower destroyed the church. The new St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church and National Shrine, which is nearing completion as I write, stands a few yards from the old church's site, overlooking the National September 11th Memorial and Museum. When completed, the beautiful domed church will contain a space where people of all faiths can come for reflection and prayer. It will show the will of all people to rebuild and resurrect from the ashes of 9/11, Archbishop Demetrios of America says. The legacy of St. Nicholas, you see, still very much with us. His story resonates down the ages. It brings messages of hope and generosity and joy. It reminds us, above all, of God's love. Since the name St. Nicholas has become associated with Christmas, I hope this little book helps you pass a quiet winter evening, perhaps beside a hearth in the glow of a Christmas tree. May the good saint's story touch you, as it has so many, with God's love. William J. Bennett, 2018. When most of us hear the name St. Nicholas, we immediately think of Santa Claus. As children, we listen wide-eyed to Clement Clarke Moore's famous poem about the night before Christmas, when down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. At some point along the way, we may have asked an older and wiser acquaintance why Santa sometimes goes by this alias. The answer we received was probably not very informative. And once we are all grown up, with children of our own, and by chance are asked the same question, we still are not sure. If pressed, we might guess that there once was a very good man named Nicholas, and his name somehow came to be connected with Santa Claus. But Saint Nicholas remains an elusive figure to us. He is elusive even to scholars who study such matters. They believe that Saint Nicholas served as a bishop during the 4th century in the town of Myrna on the coast of the eastern Mediterranean Sea. He may have attended the famous Council of Nicaea. Actually, he has. I looked that up. And there's an original bishops list of the bishops that came first and signed in, but there are many other lists of bishops. There's about 4 others, and they all have Saint Nicholas, or they all have Nicholas of Myra on there. So I guess maybe as of this writing, that wasn't confirmed, but it actually is confirmed. By Constantine the Great in 325 to resolve issues troubling the Christian Church, but the details of his life and work remain sketchy. If he wrote anything, it's long gone. The first known Nicholas biography dates to the 8th or 9th century, long after his death, when a Greek monk known as Michael the Archimandrite assembled a collection of tales about him. We are left to piece together his life as best we can, using what we know and a good bit of surmise to arrive at the most likely story. Often we must rely on tradition as well as clues provided by the history of the times in which he lived. If the reputation he left behind means anything, we know there was something remarkable about this holy man. For hundreds of years, his name has been evoked, his deeds recounted, his shadow falls across epochs. Why bother with the history of St. Nicholas? For one thing, his is a fascinating story. Its sheer vastness of scale is astounding. It stretches from the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa to the Americas and beyond. It crosses oceans, deserts, and frozen Arctic climes. This is an adventure tale, complete with emperors, knights, villains, shipwrecks, kidnappings, treasure, and dark dungeons. It is the age-old struggle of good against evil, of right against might. But there is a larger reason to remember. St. Nicholas, he matters to Christmas. This saintly man who lived so long ago has come to influence one of our holiest seasons and most beloved holidays. This influence that has come across so many centuries is a kind of miracle. It is evidence of God's love. One purpose of this book is to help put St. Nicholas back into Christmas. It explains his connections with Santa Claus and the common spirit they share. As you will see, St. Nicholas makes Santa Claus a larger and richer figure than you might expect him to be. So here is the story of Nicholas, based on what we can reasonably conjecture, in a story worth knowing. I hope that once you know it, you remember St. Nicholas each December. You may never again think of Santa Claus in quite the same way. If that is the case, then this book will have achieved its aim of helping to deepen the spirit of Christmas. Part 1, the life of St. Nicholas. And how is our background? Is it still moving around? Okay, it's still moving around. There we go. Okay. Answered prayers and secret alms. Like many good things, this story begins with a mother's prayer. Let's see. During the days of the Roman Empire in a province called Lycia, in what is now the country of Turkey, a husband and wife longed for a child. Theophanes and Nona, their names are said to have been. Their home was Patara, a flourishing town at the mouth of the river Xanthos on the Mediterranean coast, a place where the forested hills slope down to the clear blue sea. Theophanes and Nona were a well-to-do couple. Perhaps they inherited land and money. Theophanes may have run a prosperous trade in cloth or milled grains. History does not tell us. We know only that, according to one old chronicle, they were people of a substantial lineage, holding property enough without superfluity. Their comfortable lives were troubled by one great unhappiness. Though they had been married for many years, they had never managed to have children. As time passed, they wept and waited, but no child came. Still, Nona refused to give up hope. Instead, she did something very wise. She prayed, like Hannah in the first book of Samuel in the Bible. She poured out her soul to God, asking him to remember her. It must have seemed like a miracle when late in life, after so many hopes and tears, Nona's prayers were answered around the year 280 AD with the birth of a son. She surely recalled how Hannah, who was finally blessed with the boy Samuel had vowed to give unto the Lord all the days of his life. Some say that when Nona's child was placed in his bath right after his birth, he stood up by himself and raised his arms as if to praise God. Others say that on Wednesdays and Fridays, traditional days of fasting for early Christians, he refused to nurse until after sundown. Such are the legends, but there must have been something that made the proud parents hope that their child would someday serve God and his fellow men in some remarkable way. They christened the baby Nicholas, a name that in Greek means people's victor, and an uncle who was an abbot at a nearby monastery. Patara was a good town to grow up in, a bustling center of trade full of sights for a boy to explore. Wide avenues lined the columns and paved with stones led from town gates, past houses, shops, and temples to busy Argoi market squares. Beneath brightly colored awnings, merchants arranged their goods: grapes, olives, cheese, herbs, dyed wool and cotton, pottery, jewelry, leather, glassware, skins of wine. The shoppers who haggled with vendors, and the men who swapped news in the shade of roofed colonnades, all spoke Greek, the dominant language of that part of the world. Young Nicholas must have spent many hours listening to the shouts of the tradesmen advertising their wares and the talk of women filling jugs with water at public fountains. As he roamed the streets of Patara, the boy remembers both of his proud Greek heritage and imperial Rome's wide reach. A temple to Apollo drew travelers hoping to divine the future from a revered oracle. The Grand Assembly building, where officials from all over Lycia meant to debate, could seat 1,000 people. Elegant baths with rooms covered by marble tiles dotted the city. A massive monument with 3 Roman arches, built to honor a governor of Lycia, supported an aqueduct that brought water to Patera's inhabitants. On a hillside near the sea stood the favorite spot of many Patarans, the amphitheater. More than 24 tiers of stone seats rose above a raised stage where actors spoke or sang their lines. The crowd that gathered to enjoy comedies, tragedies, and dances could be a rowdy bunch, stomping their feet when pleased or throwing olive pits when disappointed by the show. But Nicholas's favorite spot may well have been the port, where the boy could watch fishing boats unload the day's catch and merchant ships arrive from points around the eastern Mediterranean, Rhodes, Cyprus, Antioch, Alexandria, and beyond. Occasionally seamen who had made it as far as Rome itself sailed to Patara. They brought news of Roman armies on the march, edicts of emperors, and tales of distant places like North Africa and Gaul. At about the age of 7, Nicholas was placed under the charge of a pedagogue, a trusted slave who took him to school, helped him with lessons, and kept him out of mischief. The boy gathered with other students under a roofed colonnade to study grammar and arithmetic. He practiced writing with a stylus on a wooden tablet covered with beeswax, and listened intently at the schoolmaster as he told ancient stories, such as how Achilles killed Hector outside the walls of Troy. But there was one part of the boy's education not to be trusted by the schoolmaster, and that was the matter of faith. Theophane and Nona had embraced a new and growing religion, one that required utmost devotion. They were members of Patera's Christian community. In the 2.5 centuries since the time of Jesus, Christianity had spread from the remote province of Judea on the eastern Mediterranean to much of the Roman Empire. The story of the carpenter from Galilee had won converts from Palestine to Britain. His message of love brought new hope to believers. Christianity welcomed all races and classes into a community that offered refuge in a tempest-tossed world. On Sundays, Nicholas and his parents attended services in a neighbor's house, where they prayed, sang hymns, and studied scripture. They loved the book of Psalms for its soul-stirring verses, such as, "Make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all ye lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before his presence with singing." They carefully memorized the words of Jesus, "Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me." They shared bread and wine in remembrance of the Last Supper, so they would be one with Christ. At the end of prayers, they say, "Amen, so be it." And they sounded praise with the word Alleluia, God be praised. Nicholas loved hearing stories about the boy David slaying the giant Goliath, Daniel standing unharmed in the pit of hungry lions, and the friends of the paralyzed man luring him through the roof of a crowded house so Jesus might heal him. He learned of the Apostle Paul traveling on the road to Damascus, was struck down by a blinding light, and heard a voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" The tireless missionary had visited Patria on one of his famous journeys and left behind a small group of converts. Christians copied the letters that Paul wrote to congregations in places such as Corinth, Galatia, and Philippi, and passed them from church to church, poring over words such as love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Nicholas's parents taught him early that Christians served God by serving the less fortunate. In the age when the general rule of existence was fend for yourself or die, a Christian's duty was to help others. Churches organized to care for the poor and sick. See how those Christians love one another, pagans marveled. At times, it was dangerous to be a Christian. The Roman Empire, though vast and mighty, faced desperate problems. A series of weak emperors, outbreaks of plague, generals who fought each other for power, attacks by barbarians along the empire's borders. When officials needed scapegoats to take the brunt of public frustrations, it was all too easy to single out Christians who refused to worship the old gods of Rome and sacrifice to the emperor. The boy Nicholas heard stories of how the Emperor Nero had blamed Christians for the disastrous fire that swept Rome in AD 64, and how he had made human torches of Christians to light his garden at night. He heard about Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna in Asia Minor, who was seized by the proconsul Status Quadratus and ordered to curse Christ. I have wild beasts, the proconsul threatened. If you do not repent, I will have you thrown to them. Send for them, Polycarp replied. If you do not despise the wild beasts, I will order you to be burned alive. Why do you delay? Bring on what you will. They burned him alive while the crowd shouted, "This is the father of the Christians. This is the destroyer of our gods." In times of persecution, Christians might, let me see. Is it still Christmas stuff? Yes, it is. Okay. In times of persecution, Christians might live one edict away from imprisonment or death. In years when rulers let them alone, they remained in close-knit community, protective of each other and wary of rumors of official displeasure. But if being a Christian brought occasional scorn or danger, it also brought immeasurable rewards. As Nicholas grew, his faith grew. The old writers tell us he began to spend less time following boyish pursuits and more time pondering the message that Jesus had brought to the world. As he approached manhood, he discovered that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, and peace. Then something happened that surely must have tested his faith. A plague swept through Lycia, passing from town to town, cutting down whole families, striking rich and poor alike. Theophans and Nona were among the dead. Nicholas, left alone in the world, went to live with his uncle at the monastery to recover from the blow. Slowly, bewilderment and despair gave way to acceptance. He asked God for strength and discovered that it came to him. As he healed, he resolved to train for the priesthood. As a first step, he made up his mind to give away his possessions, including his inheritance left to him by his parents. This decision gave rise to the most beloved story about Nicholas. In Patara, there were a family that had fallen on hard times. They had once been wealthy, But misfortunes had overtaken them, and now they were so poor they had barely enough to live on. The father had tried to find work, but when people saw his soft hands, which had never known any kind of hard labor, they took him to be lazy and turned him away. The man had 3 daughters of marriageable age, but their chances of finding husbands were grim, since the father could offer no dowries. In those days, a young woman needed a dowry to attract an offer of marriage. As their financial situation grew desperate, the father realized that the only way to ensure the survival of his children was to sell them into servitude. At least that way they would have enough to eat. And servitude, selling young women into servitude, I think you know what that actually means. When news of the family's plight reached Nicholas, he at once set about thinking of a way to help them. He remembered Jesus' teaching that when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret. He soon came up with a plan. That night he put several gold coins into a small bag and started out for the home of the father and his 3 daughters. The hour was late and the streets deserted when he arrived. Inside the house, the family was sleeping. Nicholas crept up to a window, reached through, and dropped the bag of gold. Some say it landed in a shoe, others in a stocking that had been left hanging to dry. Then he hurried away before anyone saw him. The next morning, the family discovered a bag of gold. Weeping with joy and astonishment, they fell to their knees and thanked God for the generous gift. Not only did they have money to live on for some time, there was enough to provide a generous dowry for the oldest daughter, and she was soon married. When Nicholas saw how much happiness his secret gift had caused, he decided the second daughter must have a dowry too. He went to the house at night, as before, and dropped a second bag through the window. The next morning brought more tears and of joy and astonishment, and more thanks to God for the marvelous gift. The second daughter soon had her dowry and was married. The father dared to hope that his 3rd daughter would also receive a gift that would allow her to marry. But now he was determined to find out who the earthly angel who had dropped the gift into the stocking might be. Night after night he stayed up, waiting and watching. Finally, late one night, just as he had concluded that their mysterious benefactor had deserted them, a bag of gold came flying through the window. The man rushed out of the house, ran after the shadowy figure that was hurrying away, and caught it by the wave of his cloak. When he recognized Nicholas, he fell to his knees and began to kiss his hands that helped his family so graciously. Nicholas asked him to stand and told him to thank God instead. He begged the father not to tell anyone the secret of who had left the gold. Despite his longing for anonymity, Nicholas's act of generosity set him on the path to becoming the world's most famous gift giver. One whom the Lord called to him. Nicholas plunged into his training for the priesthood. Gone now were the luxuries he had known as a boy. He fasted often and slept on the floor in order to focus his thoughts on the task ahead. His uncle offered patient guidance, putting onto his hands precious manuscripts to study. In the book of Acts, Nicholas read how the apostles first spread the news about Jesus, how on the day of the Pentecost they heard the sound of a rushing wind and saw tongues of fire, and how they began to speak in tongues. He pored over Peter's first sermon, mesmerizing words such as, "For the promise is to you and to your children, and to all that are far off, every one whom the Lord our God calls to him." He studied a manual for Christian living and worship. It outlined the roles of bishops and priests and deacons, as well as rules for baptism, communion, penance, and fasting. From the manual, he learned one of the oldest prayers for the Eucharist. "As this broken bread was scattered over the hills, but was gathered together and made one, so let your church be gathered together from the ends of the earth into your kingdom." He searched the writings of early Christian leaders for wisdom. "Here is the beginning and the end of life," Ignatius of Antioch had written. "Faith is the beginning, the end is love." In the epistles of Clement of Rome, he found models for sermons. "Day and night show to us the resurrection. The night is lulled to rest. The day ariseth. The day departeth. The night cometh on." Tradition says that Nicholas decided to follow the example of his uncle and make a trip to the Holy Land. He boarded an Egyptian merchant vessel that sailed east along the coast of Asia Minor, rounded the island of Cyprus, and continued south along the coast of Palestine, stopping along the way at port cities such as Sidon and Tyre. He arrived at the harbor of Caesarea, famous for its ingenious concrete sea, then joined a caravan for the overland journey to Jerusalem. At that time, around the year 300, Jerusalem was a city under Roman occupation. Much of the old city that Jesus knew had been destroyed and buried beneath Roman construction. But Jerusalem's Christian community welcomed pilgrims such as Nicholas, sheltered them, and guided them to holy sites. Nicholas followed in Jesus' footsteps. He visited the room of the Last Supper where Jesus last shared bread and wine with his disciples, Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified, and the place of the Holy Sepulchre, where his body had been laid. Nicholas also journeyed to Bethlehem, and it is said he slept in a cave, not unlike the grotto where tradition says the baby Jesus was born. When the time came to go home, Nicholas returned to Caesarea and struck a bargain with the captain merchant vessel to drop him off at Pantera. Check this, make sure that this is still. Okay. So to make sure some crazy thing isn't playing. On such journeys, passengers had no cabins or beds. They had to content themselves with a spot on the deck amid the stacks and piles of cargo. The ship set out with a fair wind. Nicholas passed the time by chatting with the seamen and gazing at the passing coastline. Then the weather changed. A storm blew out of nowhere, lashing the boat with fierce gales and waves, crashed over the bow. As the winds howled, Nicholas no doubt thought of the storm that had overwhelmed the ship carrying Paul to Rome for trial. The book of Acts tells how Paul watched the desperate sailors tried to save the vessel. As we were violently storm-tossed, they began next day to throw the cargo overboard, and the third day they cast out with their own hands the tackle of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars appeared for many a day, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Nicholas tried to calm the mariners with prayers for deliverance. When the storm finally subsided, they were still afloat, but they discovered that the rudder had been smashed. They drifted for days with no land in sight until the sailors gave up hope of any fate except dying of thirst upon the open sea. Nicholas refused to give up in despair. One morning, as the crew woke, one of them gave a shout. There on the horizon lay the coast. The winds and the currents pushed them steadily towards the land, and as they drew near, they were astonished to realize that they had drifted to Patera. The day came when Nicholas completed his religious training, and proud uncle ordained him as a priest. Blessed is the flock that they will be worthy to have him as his pastor. His uncle told the Christian community, excuse me. His uncle told the Christian community of Patera, because this one will shepherd well the souls of those who have gone astray, will nourish them on the passage of piety, and will be a merciful helper in misfortune and tribulation. Nicholas took up the hard, endless work of the ministry. From the minute he became a priest, one can hardly keep count of the virtue and goodness he spread about him. In the nights spent at his devotions, days of fasting, steadfast goodwill, and his prayers for all, reports Simon, who compiled stories of Nicholas hundreds of years after his death. In every avenue and agora in Patera, Nicholas found opportunities to do God's will, whether they meant simply offering a kind word to a stranger, settling a dispute between friends, or convincing neighbor to help neighbor. Whenever he passed the house where he had left 3 bags of gold, he smiled to himself. As he worked, he did his best to live up to the qualities that Polycarp of Samara had laid down for clergy in the 2nd century in his letter to the Philippians. And then let the presbyters be compassionate and merciful to all, bringing back those that wander, visiting all the sick, and not neglecting the widow or the orphan or the poor, but always providing for that which is becoming in the sight of God and man, abstaining from all wrath and unjust judgment, keeping far off from all covetousness, not quickly crediting an evil report against anyone, not severe in judgment, as knowing that we are all under a debt of sin. The years passed quickly, and Nicholas's reputation for kindness and generosity spread. The Christian community in Patera grew. As people observed his goodness, many followed his example and teachings. Simon says, they scorned a material, transient existence and placed their trust in the eternal. Eventually, Nicholas's dedication led to a promotion and high honor. He was chosen to be Bishop of Myra, an important city several miles east of Patera on the Lycian coast. There is an old, strange story about how Nicholas became bishop. The man who had served as a bishop of Myra for many years had died, and the other bishops of the region gathered in the city to elect someone to succeed him. They discussed the matter for several days and prayed over it, but reached no agreement over who would be the right choice. Finally, one of the oldest and wisest bishops stood and suggested that they should put the matter into God's hands. He announced that he had a dream in which a voice told him to watch the doors of the church before the morning prayers. The first person named Nicholas to enter the church would be the man they were looking for. Would the bishops be willing to try it? They would. As the time for the morning prayer service approached, the old bishop stationed himself near the church door and waited. Meanwhile, Nicholas, in town to pay his respects to the memory of the deceased bishop, had awakened at dawn. Dressing quickly, he headed to church to spend some time in quiet meditation before the prayer service began. As he stepped through the door, an old bishop he did not know stopped him. "What do people call you, my son?" the old man asked. "My name is Nicholas, your servant," he answered with humility. "Follow me, child." Taking him by the hand, he led him before the other bishops and cried, "Here, my brothers, is Nicholas. Let us greet our new bishop." The bewildered Nicholas at first refused the appointment, insisting that he wasn't ready for such responsibility. But it is a difficult thing to say no to a room full of bishops, and finally accepted. Did it really happen that way? No one knows. Certainly, in those days, people put much more stock in dreams and visions than we do today. They often looked for signs from God to help them reach a decision. Congregations sometimes chose leaders by lottery as a way to determine God's will. In any event, Nicholas became the leader of the Christian community in Myra. The young bishop had barely settled into his new role when he met the guests of his life. The tragedy known as the Great Persecution fell upon the Christian church. It came at a time when the Roman Empire was under enormous strain. Enemies constantly launched attacks on the empire's borders. Goths, Saxons, and Franks in the north, Persians in the east, Moors in the south. In Rome itself, the rule of law often disappeared amid riots and drunken brawls. Diocletian, who became emperor in AD 284, was determined to bring order to chaos, a man who expected his commands to be followed without delay. He grew suspicious of Christians who refused to worship the old gods of Rome or sacrifice to the emperor. His heir apparent, Galerius, harbored stronger hatreds. He was convinced that Christians were enemies of the state. At a sacrifice attended by the two rulers, the imperial priest had trouble reading the usual signs on the livers of sacred beasts. They slaughtered animal after animal to no avail. Then someone noticed that Christians present during the ceremony had made the sign of the cross. Their meddling had interfered with the divinations of the imperial priests. I'm going to turn the space heater on. I have a small space heater. And I realize it is very hard to read freezing. My fingers are like ice. I can't breathe very well. I was like, I'm very, having no heat is very, very difficult. So I'm sorry about that. So we're, okay. Egged on by Galerius, Diocletian flew into a rage. In AD 303, he decreed the Christian churches were to be destroyed, services banned, and scriptures burned. Christians could no longer hold public office. Further edicts brought the arrest of Christian leaders and an order that all Christians sacrifice to pagan gods. Years of terror followed. Christians who did not submit faced imprisonment or painful death. Some were clawed with iron scrapers, others thrown into cages with leopards or bears, others roasted alive or torn limb from limb. A Christian who died for his faith came to be known as a martyr, a Greek word meaning witness. Martyrs bore witness to the deepest convictions of the followers of Christ. So many suffered that the murderous axe was dulled, and the executioners grow weary, wrote Eusebius of Caesarea. The Roman legions surrounded one village in Asia to enforce the decree to sacrifice to the gods. When the townspeople refused, the soldiers set fire to the place, killing everyone. In Myra, Nicholas heard the reports of the spreading horror and prepared himself. He did not have to wait long for the tramp of Roman soldiers in the streets, the banging on the door, the command to surrender to Caesar's will. He followed the soldiers into the depths of the black, suffocating prison, wondering if he would ever see daylight again. He must have asked himself that question countless times during the following years. Threats were the first weapons his captors used to break him down. When those didn't work, they tried hunger and thirst. When that failed, they moved on to beatings. Nicholas refused to renounce his beliefs. They pulled him from the cell, tortured him until he lost consciousness, then threw him back in his hole and left him alone until he grew strong enough to be tortured again. During the long stretches when he sat and waited for the executioner's summons, Nicholas kept up his ministry. He comforted his fellow captives, urged them to keep faith, and tended the wounded as best he could. He led prayers and worship services. Occasionally, he may have been able to receive visitors and even smuggle out letters to his scattered flock. All the while, he fought to survive from one day to the next. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the fires of hatred and destruction began to burn themselves out. Diocletian, weary and sick after our 20-year reign, abdicated his throne. His successor, Galerius, redoubled the persecutions, but the people grew so sick of the bloodshed that he finally gave in. From his deathbed, Galerius issued an edict of toleration, restoring the rights to Christians in parts of the empire. Then came even better news. Constantine, ruler of Rome's western provinces, led an army against another Roman leader for control of the empire. Before the battle, Constantine had a vision of a flaming Chi-Rho cross, a symbol of Christ, emblazoned in the sky. Beneath the cross, he saw the words, "In this sign you shall conquer." He ordered that the cross be painted on the soldiers' shields, and he marched on to win the battle in AD 313. Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which granted freedom of worship to all religions, including Christianity, and ordered the return of Christian properties. One morning, the door of a dark, cold cell swung open, and a guard with a torch beckoned to the pale man sprawled on the floor inside. A man still young in age, but made old in appearance by years of confinement. With faltering steps, the filthy, ragged prisoner trailed the guard down a long passageway and up damp stone stairs. At the top, a brusque voice told him he could go. Another door swung open. Nicholas, shading his eyes with trembling hands, stepped into the daylight. In service bold as a lion, the reign of Constantine proved to be a turning point in history. The Edict of Milan helped transform Christianity from a persecuted religion into a popular faith. Christianity spread faster than ever before. Jesus' message offered comfort in a world full of peril and suffering. His call to love God and neighbor gave meaning to hard lives. Constantine's own enthusiasm for Christianity helped promote it through all classes of society. The emperor bestowed presents and property upon Christian congregations. He funded the construction of churches and basilicas, including St. Peter's in Rome. He declared Sunday a day of rest, placed Christian symbols on his coins, and paid for new copies of the Bible. When Constantine decided to move his capital from Rome to the eastern part of the empire, he settled on the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. There, on the banks of the Bosporus, a narrow waterway dividing Europe and Asia, he erected a glorious new city boasting palaces, gardens, public squares, and theaters. He adorned his capital with magnificent churches, testaments to the new strength of the Christian faith. Constantinople, a Byzantium. Sorry. It's so cold in here. It's hard to move my body. It's hard to move my lips. So when you live without heat, this is what you get. I can't move my lips properly to say the words right. I'm not telling you, my lips, my fingers, everything feels like ice. I'm sorry about that. Byzantium, I know all these words, oh my God, was eventually renamed because one of the world's finest cities and a center of Christianity. Hundreds of miles away in Myra, Nicholas shouldered the task of pulling his flock back together. There were deep wounds that needed time to heal. Mothers, fathers, and children had been lost in the great persecution. Livelihoods had been destroyed. Some Christians, enraged by years of oppression, took brutal revenge against their persecutors. Those who had remained steadfast in their faith often looked with deep bitterness on those who had renounced Christianity or had fled to the hills or threatened. Nicholas reminded them all of the words of Jesus. A new commandment I give to you, that you will love one another as I have loved you, and that you also love one another. The years in prison had left Nicholas with an inward strength. Others recognized that strength were drawn to it. People who needed hope, courage, and compassion sought him out. All the day long, he spent in labor proper to his office, listening to the requests and needs of those who came to him. We are told the doors of his house were open to all. Not long after Nicholas was released from prison, famine struck Lycia. The rains stopped, rivers shrank, crops in the fields withered and died. The granaries at Myra were emptied, and the people began to go hungry. As the famine spread, so did disease. The agora filled with beggars, and every street heard the cries of those mourning the death of loved ones. One day Nicholas got word that some grain ships en route from Alexandria to Constantinople had stopped up at Myra. He hurried down to Myra's port to see if the ship's captains could offer help for his starving people. By the time he had got down to the harbor, an anxious crowd had gathered. He pushed his way to the front, spoke to the sailor standing guard on the waves, and managed to arrange a conference with the captains. Nicholas wasted no time in asking for some of the grain. "We can do it," they answered. "The cargo was measured in Alexandria. If we arrive in Constantinople with any less, we must answer for it." "I'm not asking you to give it away," Nicholas said. "We have good money to pay. We need grain. Come with me." The reluctant captains followed him through the streets, where they saw for themselves the results of the famine. "Trust in God," Nicholas told them. "Look into your hearts and do what you know to be right." The captains talked it over at length, and in the end they agreed to unload a portion of their grain. It was enough to help the people make it through the worst of their crisis, and it provided seed with which to plant new crops. Many years later, a legend arose. It told how, when the grain ship reached Constantinople and the captains unloaded their ships, they were dumbfounded to find that they had just as much grain in their holds as when they had left Alexandria. One of the oldest stories about Nicholas depicts him as a champion of justice and protector of the innocent. According to the story, the Bishop of Myra was living proof that the righteous are bold as a lion. The Emperor Constantine, faced with a revolt in the region of Phrygia, dispatched troops under 3 trusted generals to quiet the unrest. Rough seas forced the troop ships to stop off Andriac for a while. Some of these words I've never seen, these cities I've never seen before. They're probably lost to antiquity. The 3 generals named Ursus, Nepotianos, and Herpilion, I think I got that right, granted their men shore leave while the ships waited to get underway again. Before long, a brawl erupted between some of the soldiers and locals. Looting and destruction of property followed. When Nicholas heard of the trouble, he hurried down to the port. "Where are you from? And why are you here?" he asked the 3 generals. They explained that they were simply passing through. "Well, if your mission is to promote the peace," Nicholas told them, "you're not doing a very good job because your troops are causing trouble in my town." The embarrassed generals ordered their officers to restore order and repair the damage. Once things had quieted down, Nicholas patched things up by inviting Ursus, Nepotianos, and Herpilion to come dine with him. As they climbed the road to Myra, they heard shouts and saw a group of citizens rushing down the hill in search of the bishop. It took Nicholas a moment to untangle the report they brought him. The local magistrate, a thoroughly corrupt man by the name of Eustathios, had accepted a bribe to sentence 3 innocent men to death. The victims were only moments away from execution. Nicholas rushed to the center of the town, followed the 3 generals. The crowd there made their way for him. They saw him come. The crowd there made way for him. Okay. It's so cold in here. There's a fog over my eyes. Do you ever like walk when you walk into the cold, like freezing outside, and the cold is so cold that it makes your eyes fog. You can't really see correctly because I think your eyes start to tear, but at the same time they tear, and because they're a little warm, it fogs when it's the cold. So that's what I'm doing, and my fingers, I can barely move them. They feel like ice, and I've got cuts all over my hands, and they're all chapped just from doing dishes in the cold. So this is what happens when you don't have a fireplace. Wish I did. And you can't afford heat. You can't afford heat. It's a reality. It's too cold to do much either because it's just so damn cold. Okay. Oh, gee, it says device will power down soon. You know what? I think something here is not connected. Just a second. Okay. It still says device will power down soon. I'll try that. Huh. That's weird. Huh. That's weird. Okay, all right. I think it's connected now. Yeah, it's connected now. Everything that could go wrong goes wrong. Oh, do we still have Christmas shows here? Okay, that's these are all stories of Santa Claus. Or actually St. Nicholas, I should say. Okay, now where have we got here? Okay, the executioner stood behind him, the sword raised, ready to carry out the sentence. The bishop strode up to the executioner and grabbed the sword from his hand. He quickly untied the 3 bound men and set them free. The executioner made no objection. News of what had happened raced through the streets of Myra as people streamed in and out of the town center. Hearing the excited reports, Eustathios hurried to the place of the execution. When Nicholas saw him coming, he made straight for the magistrate. "Evil man," he cried, "you can't be sure that I'll send word to the Emperor Constantine about what just sort of man you are and what sort of justice your administrator." That didn't make any sense. You're telling the story in the freezing cold, in my house, in my room, in the freezing cold. Let me say that thing again. Evil man, he cried. You can be sure that I'll send word to Emperor Constantine about just what sort of man you are and what sort of justice you administer. When Astyages saw the three generals standing at Nicholas's side, fear seized him. In a matter of seconds, the truth came out. Two city leaders looking to get rid of some old enemies had bribed Astyages to condemn the men on false charges. At first, Astyages tried to avoid blame. It wasn't my doing, he insisted. It was the wish of Extasius and Simonides. Extasius and Simonides are not the cause of your evil, Nicholas reported. It is your own greed for silver and gold. Confronted with the facts, Astyages confessed his sin and begged forgiveness. Nicholas demanded that the charges against the three innocent men be cleared, and he advised the magistrate to mend his ways quickly. In the year 325, Emperor Constantine called on the bishops of the Christian Church to gather in the city of Nicaea in northwest Asia Minor to mend some cracks in the church's foundations. Divisions that, if left untended, might lead to a collapse. The main problem came from the teachings of a priest from Alexandria named Arius, who held that Jesus Christ was not as divine as God. Arius argued that since God created Jesus as his son, then Jesus must not have existed throughout all time as God, and therefore Jesus could not be God's equal. A bitter theological dispute spread through the church, at times even causing bloodshed. Constantine was counting on the Christian church to help unify his empire. A schism in the church was a threat to his realm. The emperor decided that he would take no chances and that he would personally preside over the Council of Nicaea. About 300 bishops gathered at Constantine's palace in Nicaea. The emperor, sitting on an elevated throne covered with gold leaf, opened the conference by urging unity to preserve the peace. Then heated theological disputes began. Tradition says that Nicholas was one of the bishops attending the Great Council. And he actually was. As I said, if you listen to the introduction, the author here has some, isn't quite sure, but the list of bishops that first arrived doesn't have Nicholas on it, but there's about 4 lists of bishops that were there, and each one includes Nicholas's name. So yes, he was at the Council of Nicaea. As he sat listening to Arius proclaim views that seemed to him blasphemous, his anger mounted. He must have asked himself, did I suffer through all those years in prison to listen to this man betray our beliefs? His anger got the best of him. He left his seat, walked up to Arius, faced him squarely, and slapped him in the face. The bishops were stunned. Arius appealed to the emperor himself. Should anyone who has the temerity to strike me in your presence go unpunished? Indeed, it is unlawful for anyone to lift his hand in violence before the emperor, Constantine replied, but I will leave it to this assembly to decide whether to punish this act. The bishops decided to strip their colleague from Myra of his clerical garments and place him under guard for the rest of the meeting. Nicholas found himself under lock and key in another wing of the palace. But in the end, the Bishop of Myra got the result he wanted. When the arguments were done, the council rebuked Arius for his beliefs. The bishops drew up a statement that came to be known as the Nicene Creed, which affirms faith in the Holy Trinity and declares that Jesus is of one substance with the Father. God from God, light from light. True God from true God, begotten, not made, one in being with the Father. He's a begotten Son, which means he is of God. He's a piece, he's a part of God, not a son or a child that that someone gives birth to. It's a begotten Son is of the same substance. It's completely different. People get that mixed up. Anyway, perhaps Constantine secretly enjoyed watching someone put Arius in his place. Perhaps some of the bishops admired Nicholas for standing up forcefully, if overzealously, for his beliefs. Nicholas must have had friends and supporters in high places, because when the Council of Nicaea concluded, he was set free and his clerical robes were restored. See how long this, okay, a little bit more. I'm so cold, my jaw's freezing, so it's actually hard to speak. It's like, God, oh my God. January and February are usually much colder than December. I mean, the chill, the freezing below zero, and freezing here is 32. So when I say below zero, it's 32 degrees below Celsius. when it hits zero, then it's -0. So I don't think I'm going to make it this year. If I get sick, I'm dead. Anyway, maybe Nicholas will come and he'll bring me back to life. Nicholas lived the rest of his years in Myra, served his people and spreading his faith. There was so much work to be done. He spent his days praying, preaching, and laboring. Everywhere, the people of Myra looked Nicholas. Everywhere the people of Myra looked, Nicholas seemed to be there. The good bishop sat beside sick beds, collected donations for the needy, counseled those in trouble, befriended the lonely. He baptized converts, ordained priests, married young couples, and buried the dead. As he worked, he no doubt turned often to the words of Paul in his letter to the Romans for a reminder of the character of true service. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Never flag in zeal. Be aglow with the Spirit. Serve the Lord. When he grew quiet and old, and his beard was full white, he found that often his greatest joy came in the presence of his children. He sat with them in church or on the agora, teaching them about God's love and listening to their innocent hearts. Then he knew the truth of Jesus' words, "Let the children be alone, and do not hinder them from coming to me. For the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Sometime around the year 340, Nicholas of Myra fell ill, and his end drew near. According to the golden legend, a late medieval account, when it pleased our Lord to have him depart out this world, he prayed our Lord that he would send him his angels, and inclining his head, he saw the angels come to him, whereby he knew well that he should depart. And so saying, "Lord, into thine hands I commend my spirit," He rendered up his soul and died. Tradition says Nicholas died on December 6th, the date now observed his feast day. The people of Myra, saddened by their loss, prepared a tomb of marble in the city's cathedral. They carried Nicholas's body in a torchlight procession through the town and into the church. They laid him into the crypt and said their last goodbyes. But the memories of Nicholas and his generous spirit were not done with this earth. So that is part 1, and we have 2 more parts to go. And I'm going to try to heat this. It's a ceramic space heater I got from Amazon for $19.99. And I have no money left in my account, by the way. Halfway through the month, I have no money left. I don't know what the heck happened. I don't buy frivolous things. But I hope I get through the month. But I promise today is Monday. Wednesday will be the next reading. And I'll read the second part. And then Friday, I'll read the third. And I think Saturday night is Christmas Eve. And so I'll come back on Christmas Eve and maybe tell some other true stories, some true Christmas stories, true Christmas miracle stories, and any loose ends about St. Nicholas that we need to tie up, or would be fun to tie up. Anyway, and because I'm spending Christmas alone, you realize how few friends or no friends you have when things get really rough. I don't know. I think the pandemic really changed things, and people aren't warm and open and generous and helping. They kind of, and I live in a Democrat town and a Democrat state. It's the land of the mask and Purell. That maybe people start to show their true colors. I should live somewhere else. And the kind of winter I'm living through I'm close to Canada, so it's very, very, very cold. Anyway, so I'll see you again on Wednesday night. I hope you enjoyed this, and I promise to try to make this room warmer so my jaw will move easier and I can see clearer, because it's weird. It's like everything goes blurry because it's so cold. I get up in the morning, I open the door, I keep myself shut in here with my dog, and the heater goes on and off depending when it drops. And somebody stole my store window. I have a store window, somebody stole it. So there's nothing between the window. How dare they come and steal it? I mean, probably somebody that I know, some guy that I know. Oh, look, her window's slipping, I'll take it. And I'm freezing. I'm absolutely freezing. And so when I leave the room in the morning, I open the door and everything gets blurry, because it's like my eyes are tearing. And then the second it hits the cold, the warm hits the cold, it goes blurry. It's like, this is just awful. This is just awful. It's like, well, they have a plan. They have a plan, right? Anyway, I'll see you Wednesday. Thank you so much. Canada, they're not sending their best weather. Hey, this is so cool. Very interesting. How's it going? Peace. And John. Hi, Felina. Hope you're doing well. Oh, boy. Yeah, I'm still alive, as you can see. See, okay. There's no wait. Here we are. I'll just see if there's any more. Hey, Felina, I'm sorry. I left the chat. I had to cook dinner. How dare you eat when I'm talking? Oh, boy. I had salsa, and I made myself chicken salad with cilantro and onions, so I didn't have celery. I usually don't eat chicken, but the dog likes chicken, So when I buy food for the both of us. But I usually, before that, I bought the chicken. I was eating tons and tons of beans. I was ordering all these beans from Amazon. So it was a vegan before last Sunday. Yeah, Sunday. I've got some chicken. Oh, that's running out. Anyway, I'll see you all guys on Wednesday, and we will finish. Well, that's right. There'll be the middle, and then Friday will be the end of this book, and then I'll come back Christmas Eve, possibly Christmas Day too. Like I said, I have no invitations, and I don't think anybody's sending any gifts either. So. Very Christian of all you people. Don't leave me alone. Anyway, it's so cold I can barely move my jaw. I can't believe it's so bad. Anyway, thank you for joining me. God bless all of you. And right, it's good to see you all again. Okay, bye-bye.